1972, Studio B at Capitol Records. Catherine Morelli is standing in front of Dean Martin, the most recognizable voice in America, and she's asking him to do something nobody has ever asked before. "I need you to cry while you sing." Dean looked at her like she'd lost her mind. The session musicians in the booth stopped tuning. The producer froze mid-sip of his coffee. Even the studio assistant, a kid fresh out of UCLA, turned around. Dean Martin didn't cry. Not on stage, not on camera, not in recordings, and certainly not in front of a 28-year-old vocal coach who'd been working with him for exactly 6 days. But Catherine wasn't backing down, because she'd heard something in Dean's voice that nobody else had, something hidden, something locked. And over the next 15 years, she would watch that voice change in ways that still haunt her today. Because Dean Martin's voice didn't just age, it broke, note by note, loss by loss, until there was nothing left but silence. Catherine Morelli had been hired in the spring of 1972. She was young, classically trained, and frankly terrified. Her agency had called her on a Tuesday morning. "We need you at Capitol Records tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp. You'll be working with Dean Martin." Catherine nearly dropped the phone. Dean Martin, the man who made Everybody Loves Somebody sound like velvet, the king of cool himself? She showed up 45 minutes early, clutching her notes, her hands shaking. When Dean walked in, he was exactly what she expected. Tan, confident, impeccable suit, that smile that could disarm anyone. He shook her hand. "So you're the one who's gonna fix my voice?" Catherine swallowed hard. "Mr. Martin, your voice doesn't need fixing. It's perfect." Dean laughed, that famous laugh. "Honey, if it was perfect, you wouldn't be here." And that's when Catherine realized something. Dean Martin knew. He knew his voice was changing. He just didn't know why. The first few sessions were textbook. Breathing exercises, scale work, range tests. Dean was disciplined, focused, professional, but Catherine noticed something strange. Every time she asked him to add emotion to a phrase, to open up vocally, to let vulnerability into the sound, Dean would shut down. Not dramatically, just subtly. He'd smile, crack a joke, change the subject. One afternoon, 3 months into their work together, Catherine tried a different approach. They were rehearsing Everybody Loves Somebody. Dean had sung it 1,000 times. It was his signature, his crown jewel, but Catherine stopped him mid-verse. "Dean, can I ask you something?" He lowered the mic. "Shoot, when you sing this song, what do you feel?" Dean paused. His smile flickered for just a second. "I feel like I'm doing my job." "But what do you feel?" Catherine pressed. Dean's jaw tightened. "I feel like we should get back to work." That was the first time Catherine saw the armor. Dean Martin's voice wasn't just an instrument. It was a shield, perfect, controlled, impenetrable, and he had no intention of letting anyone see what was underneath. The breakthrough came in 1975, 3 years into their sessions. They were working on a live album, and Dean was struggling with a ballad. Not technically. Technically, he was flawless, but emotionally, it was flat. Catherine stopped him again. "Dean, I need you to try something for me," he sighed. "Kathy, we've been over this. Just try it, please." She walked him through a visualization exercise. "Think of someone you love, someone who's gone. I want you to sing to them." Dean's face went blank. "I'm not doing that." "Dean!" I said no, but Catherine didn't back down. "You're paying me to make you better, so let me do my job." There was a long silence. Then Dean picked up the microphone, and he sang. This time something changed. On the second verse, his voice cracked. Just slightly, just enough for Catherine to notice. And when she looked at him, she saw tears in his eyes. Dean stopped mid-phrase. He set the mic down, and without a word, he walked out of the studio. Catherine stood there, stunned. The producer looked at her. "What just happened?" Catherine shook her head. "I think I just saw the real Dean Martin." Dean didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. When he finally came back, he acted like nothing had happened. But Catherine noticed something. He started requesting different songs, softer songs, songs about loss, about memory, about longing, and his voice began to shift, not in a bad way, in a deeper way. By 1980, Catherine had been working with Dean for 8 years, and she was starting to hear things that worried her. Dean's range was still intact. His tone was still smooth, but there were moments, brief moments, where his voice would catch, not on the high notes, on the emotional ones. Certain words, certain phrases. Son, gone, forever, alone. Every time Dean sang those words, his voice would hesitate, like it was afraid to say them out loud. Catherine started keeping notes. She didn't tell Dean, but she tracked every session, every song, every moment where his voice betrayed something deeper than technique. In 1983, Catherine noticed Dean couldn't sing My Boy anymore, not physically, emotionally. The song was about a father and son. It had never been part of his main repertoire, but Dean had recorded it years earlier. Now, whenever they tried to rehearse it, his voice would tremble, not from strain, from something else. Catherine suggested cutting it from the set list. Dean refused. I need to be able to sing this song, he said, his voice tight. Why? Catherine asked gently. Dean looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that scared her. Desperation. Because if I can't sing it now, I won't be able to when I need to. Catherine didn't understand. Not then. But looking back, she realizes. Dean Martin was rehearsing for grief. He was preparing his voice for a loss he knew was coming. He just didn't know when. March 21st, 1987. Catherine was at home when the phone rang. It was Dean's manager. Kathy, I need to tell you something. Dean Paul was killed this morning. Plane crash. All sessions are suspended indefinitely. Catherine hung up the phone and sat in silence. Dean Paul, Dean's son, the fighter pilot, the golden boy, gone. She tried calling Dean. No answer. She tried again the next day, the day after. Nothing. 2 years passed. Catherine heard rumors. Dean had stopped performing, stopped recording, stopped answering calls. He'd become a ghost. Then, in October 1989, Catherine's phone rang. It was Dean. Kathy, his voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. I need you to come over. I need to try something. Catherine drove to his house in Beverly Hills. When Dean answered the door, she barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His face was gaunt. His eyes were hollow. But it was his voice that shocked her most. It was gone. Not completely. But the richness, the smoothness, the control, all of it had vanished. Dean led her to his living room. There was a piano in the corner covered in dust. I want to try to sing, he said quietly. Just once, to see if I still can. Catherine sat up. She guided him through warm-ups, but even the warm-up sounded wrong. His breath was shallow, his tone was thin, his pitch wavered. Okay, Catherine said gently. What do you want to sing? Dean looked at a piece of sheet music on the piano. Memories are made of this. Catherine's heart sank. That song was full of joy, full of life, full of everything Dean no longer had. But she nodded. Whenever you're ready. Dean took a breath, and he began to sing. The first line came out rough, strained, but he pushed through. Then the second line, and that's when it happened. His voice cracked, not from technique, from pain. Dean stopped, tried again. Same result. He tried a third time, a fourth, a fifth, 10 times. Each time his voice would break in the same spot, the same word. Sweet, as in sweet memories. Catherine watched as Dean's frustration turned to desperation. He was gripping the edge of the piano, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short gasps. I can't, he said, his voice breaking. I can't do it, Kathy. Catherine walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. Dean, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Dean's voice cracked completely now. There's nothing left. Don't you understand? The voice is gone. It died with him. It all died with him. Catherine stood there, frozen, because she finally understood. Dean's voice hadn't just changed because of age or technique or lack of practice. It had changed because grief had fundamentally broken something inside him. The voice is connected to everything, to breath, to emotion, to the soul. And when Dean lost his son, he lost the part of himself that made sound. The session stopped again after that day. But in May 1990, Catherine got another call. Sammy Davis Jr. had died, and Dean wanted one last session. Catherine drove to his house again. This time, Dean was even more frail. He could barely stand, but he had a request. "I want to try The Way You Look Tonight," he said. "It was Sammy's favorite. We used to sing it together. I want to see if I can do it." For him, Catherine set up the piano. She played the opening chords. Dean took a breath, and he began. The first verse came out weak but intact, then the second verse. And that's when Dean's voice stopped. Completely. Not a crack, not a waver. It just stopped, like someone had cut the power. Dean tried to push through, tried to force the sound out, but nothing came. His mouth moved. His breath went in and out, but no sound emerged. Catherine stopped playing. Dean stood there, his hand on his throat, his eyes wide with panic. "What's happening?" he whispered. "Why can't I—" Catherine walked over to him. "Dean, it's not physical. Then what is it?" Dean's voice was desperate now. "Tell me what's wrong with me." Catherine took his hands, and she said something she'd never said to a client before. "Dean, the voice goes away when you don't have a reason to sing anymore." Dean stared at her, and then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, that's it." Catherine never saw Dean Martin again after that day. He died 5 years later, on Christmas Day, 1995. Acute respiratory failure, the report said. But Catherine knew the truth. Dean Martin's voice had been dying for years, ever since the day his son's plane went down. Sammy's death had just been the final note. Catherine Morelli is 76 years old now. She's worked with some of the greatest voices in history, Streisand, Bublé, Houston, but none of them stay with her the way Dean's does. Because Dean's voice wasn't just about technique or talent. It was a map of his soul, and what she witnessed over 15 years was a man disappearing, note by note, loss by loss, until all that remained was silence. The voice, Catherine says now, sitting in her home in Los Angeles, surrounded by decades of notes and recordings, is the most honest part of us. You can fake a smile, you can fake confidence, but you can't fake a voice. And Dean's voice told the truth long before he ever could. She pauses, looking out the window. People think Dean Martin died in 1995, but I heard him die, piece by piece, starting in 1987. And by 1990, when he couldn't sing anymore, it wasn't because he'd lost his technique. It was because he'd lost everything that made him want to make sound. His son, his friends, his joy, his reason. Catherine pulls out an old cassette tape from 1975, the session where Dean finally let emotion into his voice for the first time. She hasn't listened to it in years. "I keep this," she says, "because it's the only recording I have of Dean Martin's real voice. Not the smooth one, not the cool one, the broken one, the human one, the one he spent his whole life hiding. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." She sets the tape down. "Dean taught me something I'll never forget. The voice doesn't lie, it can't. And when grief comes, it doesn't just change how we sound, it changes whether we can make sound at all. Dean Martin was the king of cool, but he was also the king of pain, and his voice carried that pain every single day until the day it finally gave up. So if you've ever wondered why Dean Martin stopped performing, why he disappeared, why he never sang again after Sammy died, now you know. It wasn't because he couldn't. It was because the part of him that made music had gone silent. And silence, Catherine says, is the loudest sound grief makes. What's the saddest song you can't listen to anymore because of someone you lost? Drop it in the comments. And if this story hit you, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more untold Hollywood stories like this that deserve to be heard.